Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. A couple of weeks ago I put up a recipe that included pecans in it. And it was a 7-layer bar. So if you haven't seen that, go have a look. And I did say in there that I've used pecans and other things, including pecan pie, and I've now had a couple requests for the pecan pie. So I've picked today to make the pecan pie. It's kind of a stay-at-home kind of day, and I've got time to do it now. It isn't a complicated recipe, and it won't take you long. So hang in there, and I will gather things up, and I will be back shortly to get started. Well, today I'm going to make my crust from scratch as well. So this is a step you can skip if you like. This would be perfectly fine using a store-bought crust. So don't let crust making be the reason that you don't try to make this pie, because you can totally do it that way. I do sometimes, but today I have enough time to go ahead and make my crust. It only takes a few minutes. So in this bowl I have 1 cup of shortening, and I'm going to add 2 cups of flour. Just going to grab my cup. So 2 cups of flour into the mix. And this is a time when you don't want to use your heaping methods or anything like that. Try to follow the recipe, because it's sort of a scientific thing to making any kind of baking, actually. You need about 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. And I'm going to just incorporate those things together before I start to add the wet ingredients. So you could do this with a pastry blender. I have one in the drawer. But I forget about it because, you know, it's one of these old-fashioned things I learned how to do this way. And so today, this is the way I'm going to do it. I've just got a fork, and I'm just cutting the shortening into the flour with my fork. I don't know if I even introduced myself. I'm hopeful that you all know who I am. But in case you don't, my name is Colleen, and I'm glad to have you along. I hope that you find something useful on this channel that you will make for yourself or your family. So this seems like kind of, what would you say? It's a lumpy mess at the moment. It's not really fine, but I'm not worried about that because I've still got some blending ahead of me. So into this, I am going to add 1 large beaten egg and 1 tablespoon of white vinegar. And I'm going to measure it over here because this is a full jug, and if it gets away from me, I don't want it spilling over into my dough, which is the way we should always measure things, but I don't always. And then I'm just going to get 2 tablespoons of cold water from the tap. Now there are people out there who would say that I should have started off with cold shortening and iced water, and if that's what works for you, then that's what you should do. But that doesn't it doesn't make such a difference to me. I make up my dough, and when I'm done with it and I've formed it into a ball, and this recipe will make 2 crusts so a double crust for a pie. In this case, I'm only going to use one of them. So I got it mixed pretty well through. I'm going to put a little flour on my board, and just a little. I don't want much on there because I don't want it to add any more to my dough. And I'm just going to roll this out, and I'm going to bring it together on the board. And they say don't handle it too much. Again, whatever works the best for you. But this works just fine for me. And some of this feels a little dry, so I'm not going to put it all in there because this feels good the way it is. And I'm feeling good about how this feels. So I am just going to cut this in half, roughly. And I am going to put each of these pieces in a bag in the refrigerator, and I will see you back here in about 10 minutes after the dough has had a chance to set and chill a little bit. See you soon. Now before I start to roll out my dough, which has been in the fridge 10 minutes, I'm just going to clean up my board because some of that sticky lard is on the board, and I want to start with a freshly floured board. So I'm going to clean this up. And wipe this down, and then we will start rolling out the dough. I have a 9.5-inch Pyrex pie plate, and that will work perfect for this, I think. And I'm just going to flour the board a little heavier, but still not excessively. And I'm going to get out my chilled dough, get my rolling pin, get it all floured up. And I'm going to flour both sides of this disc and make sure that it's at least got to start being round. And then I am going to start working the dough, and I'm turning it about 1/4 of a turn each time. Then when I start to feel it stick, I'm going to just flour, turn it over, try and remember where I was so that it stays even as it rolls out, because you don't want pieces that are heavy dough in one area and not in the other, where it's all thin and you have to patch it. If you can avoid that, that's best, I think. And yeah, still moving pretty nice here. But as it gets bigger, I'm moving it maybe a little less, because now more of the surface has flour on it too. And there we go. I think that's pretty good. Now I'm just going to fold that in half and move in my pie plate, and I'm going to fold open the dough. Now, I am not going to get too fancy with this, but I can see that there are areas where the dough hasn't reached, so I'm just going to do a little repair work, which you are not going to see once we have the product finished and in the pan. I hope that this day finds you all well, and that you're ready to take on this actually quite simple recipe. It's just a matter of having the ingredients at hand. Now I'm just going to make sure that I've pressed it to the corners. I'm being diligent to make sure there's no cracks in the bottom because this pie has a lot of liquid in it to start with, so you don't want it to be escaping underneath the crust. Okay, I'm just going to grab a knife and cut off the excess. I've got me a big knife here. And I am not going to try and make any kind of fancy crimp. Although you could, I guess, just go along and crimp the edge. Or you could use more of the dough and fold it under to make a crust that stands up. But in all honesty, in our house, we're not the biggest fan of the heavy crust parts. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that. Now I'm going to stick this quickly back into the fridge, and I will be back with you in a moment to make the filling. So I need 1.5 to 2 cups of chopped pecans for this recipe. And while I was looking up pecans, I realized that there are no indigenous nut trees or pecan trees in Canada. And in fact, the pecan is the only nut tree that is indigenous to the United States, which is where we get the largest part of our imported pecans from, is the US. Chiefly they're grown in 15 different states in the US, and they have this wonderful nutty flavor, I guess, right? They have this wonderful buttery flavor, I want to say, that just can't be beat when you're looking for a really good nutty recipe. I do try to make these for this recipe not have too many big chunks, but some chunks don't hurt. But when you're eating it, it's nice to have fairly even pieces in your mouth, if that makes sense, which I hope it does. So that you're not getting all different sizes. When I'm making this, I'm thinking about my grandmother. She had a nut meat grinder, just like a little jar that you screwed the top on, and the top had like a little hopper, and you put them nuts into the top of the hopper, and then you cranked them, and the crushed nuts fell into the little jar on the bottom. And we used to love to run that thing, and I could use it right now, but I think I'm pretty much set. So now I'm going to measure up 2 cups, or like I said, thereabouts 1.5. Yeah, I'm past the 1.5 mark, not to the 2, but that'll work just fine. And I'm just gonna slip aside and grab, well, maybe I should show you where I'm at. I actually am pretty close to, well, I'm at the 1.5 cup mark actually. I'm just gonna slip aside and grab my pie shell. Actually, my pie shell was in the refrigerator, not in the oven. So here's my chilled pie shell that I've just taken out of the refrigerator. The oven is set to 350 degrees. I'm going to sprinkle these nuts pretty evenly around the bottom of this shell. There we go. And then I'm going to make the topping for this, the gooey creamy part. I'm just going to set that there. Now this is pretty heavy in sugar, which you may or may not enjoy. I'm going to add it today, and you can fiddle with the recipe if you want to make any changes to it. This is kind of a traditional one, I think. So yeah, there's definitely ways you can tweak this. That was 1 cup of white sugar. Now I'm going to add 1/4 cup of brown sugar. If you don't have brown sugar, and this is just lightly packed, if you don't have brown sugar, you can definitely make your own at home if you have a little bit of a molasses. So brown sugar, light brown sugar, requires 1 tablespoon of molasses to 1 cup of white sugar. That will make brown sugar. If you're making dark brown sugar, then you add 2 tablespoons of molasses to it. So I would say you need about a half a teaspoon of molasses to a quarter of a cup of sugar in order to achieve brown sugar if you don't already have it. You could use 1.5. Am I getting too confusing? You could use 1 1/4 cups of white sugar and blend in really well a half a teaspoon of molasses, and that would give you the same result. I hope I didn't mess that up too much. So far in this bowl, I have 1 cup of white sugar, a quarter of a cup of brown sugar, but I'm not quite finished with the sweets yet. I'm going to add now 1 cup of light corn syrup. And this really helps to, make everything stick together really well. So in it goes. It's one of those things you don't use very often, so you may have to go out to buy. I'm not sure. I'm going to add 3 large eggs. And I'm going to add a teaspoon of vanilla. Add a little more if you like. I don't think that would be the end of the world either, but I think a teaspoon will do it. I'm just going to mix this really, really well. I got a little exuberant there, so now I have some on the counter too. So before I go any further, I'm going to wipe that up, or everything will be so sticky when I'm done. And last but not least, I'm going to add a half a teaspoon of salt, just to help bring up the flavors. And it should look luscious, kind of like that. Now I'm going to bring over my pie pan. And I am going to cover the whole thing, all the nuts that are in the pan. And you'll notice then that the nuts want to float to the top. That's what we want them to do. And I'm going to just take out a small piece of foil that will cover the top area of the pie, but I'm not going to like crimp it down. I'm just going to set it lightly on top. And then because it's going to be in the oven for quite a while, we just don't want the crust to get too brown in the oven. I've put it on a baking sheet because depending on the size of your pan and your crust, this will bubble up a lot, and you do not want to clean this out of your oven, I promise you. So into the oven it goes for 35 minutes, and then I'm going to remove the foil, and I'm going to leave the oven temperature the same, and then I'm going to remove the foil and let it cook for another 25 to 30 minutes until a knife that's inserted in it comes out, you know, cleanly, or reasonably cleanly. You don't want to leave it too long because it will get dry, but I think in total it needs to be in the oven, you know, around in, what was that, 35 and 25, around 60 minutes in total. So first 35 minutes, foil on, and I will be back when it's all finished, and I'll see you then. So here's the pie coming out of the oven. You can see that it's all still bubbly. I ended up leaving it in there a full additional 30 minutes after I took the foil off. So it was 35 minutes with the foil on the top, and then 30 minutes with the foil off. And it looks and smells wonderful. Now we need to set it aside and let it cool for at least 2 hours before we slice it up to eat. And when I get it sliced up, I will take a picture to add to the end of this video. I hope that you've enjoyed this video and that it's helped you to realize that maybe making a pecan pie isn't as hard as you might have thought it is. And I hope that you will like this video, share it with your friends, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.